I didn't sign any papers, and I'm not going to. It's a legal requirement, Caleb. You don't have a choice. You're trespassing. Get off this property. They can't just redraw the boundary lines. By 11 that night, the HOA president had me kneeling on the pavement in front of 3 squad cars, announcing to the whole street that I was trespassing in her neighborhood. Then an officer pulled up the property records and realized she just called the police on her own landlord. The first cruiser skidded around the corner so fast I heard the tires bark against the asphalt. A second followed, then a third. Red and blue lights swept across the Maple Creek clubhouse, the pool, and the row of well-kept houses behind me. Porch lights flicked on. Curtains parted. Within a minute, half the block was outside filming on their phones. It was just past 11, and I was standing next to a newly cut drainage trench, holding my phone in one hand and a survey map in the other. The HOA's contractor had pulled up 2 boundary stakes, torn out a section of my fence, and buried a concrete drainage line nearly 12 feet onto land that belonged to my family's trust. I'd already photographed the tire ruts, the displaced stakes, the contractor's logo, and the permit zip-tied to the excavator. The permit was missing exactly one thing, the landowner's signature. "Hands where I can see them, put the phone down," a young officer barked. I set it on the ground slowly. Before I could say a word, Vanessa Klein came around the cruisers in white slacks and a navy blouse, wearing the calm look of someone who assumed the police had shown up to back her up. "That's him," she said. "He's been trespassing near the clubhouse and interfering with our drainage project." I looked at her. "Your contractor crossed onto my land." She turned back to the officers. "He doesn't even live in this community. He has no business here this late. He's been photographing residents, threatening board members, trying to sabotage HOA property." None of it was true, but the rookie cop didn't know that yet. "Sir, on your knees." The asphalt was still warm from the day's heat. I went down slowly while the crowd thickened along the sidewalk. Someone called me a land thief. Someone else shouted that I was trying to steal their homes. Vanessa stood 10 feet off, arms crossed, looking like a woman who'd finally solved a problem that had been bothering her for months. I found the older deputy near the second car. His nameplate read Cruz. "I'm not a member of this HOA," I said. Vanessa laughed under her breath. "Then you have even less business being here." Cruz studied me. "You got documentation that says you're allowed on this property?" "Yes, county records." "Pull up parcel 18-447. Then look at who owns the ground under that clubhouse." Her smile thinned. Cruz walked back to his cruiser and started typing. The murmurs behind me didn't stop. Phones stayed pointed at me. Vanessa muttered something to a board member, but the confidence had drained out of her face. A minute passed, then another. Cruz leaned toward the screen, checked the parcel number again, and came back with a different expression entirely. "Mr. Mercer, are you the acting trustee of the Mercer Family Land Trust?" "I am." I turned toward Vanessa. "Ma'am," Cruz said, "this man is not trespassing." He held up the tablet. "The clubhouse, the pool, the playground, the internal roads, the drainage system, and roughly 128 acres under Maple Creek Preserve belong to the Mercer Family Land Trust." He paused, and then delivered the part that changed everything. "Your homeowners association leases this ground from him." Vanessa stared at me like I'd changed shape in front of her. I stood, brushed the grit off my knees, and said the only thing left to say. "You called the cops on your own landlord." That should have ended it. Instead, it started something much bigger, because Vanessa knew a fact the rest of the neighborhood didn't. The HOA had been collecting ground rent from every household for years. For 18 months straight. None of it had reached my family. Number how my family ended up owning the ground under an entire subdivision to understand how a whole neighborhood came to lease its own dirt from my family. You have to go back almost 30 years. I'm Caleb Mercer, 46, a structural engineer. Most of my career was spent in St. Louis inspecting bridges and parking structures. I moved back to Maple Creek after my father, Arthur, had a stroke. He survived, but lost most of his speech and could no longer run the family trust. I took over as acting trustee of land the Mercers had held since 1964. My grandfather Walter bought 140 acres back when this stretch of land was soybean fields and gravel roads. In 1997, a developer offered to buy the whole parcel outright to build a subdivision, Maple Creek Preserve. My grandfather refused to sell, but agreed to a 30-year master ground lease. The developer could build the homes, roads, clubhouse, and pool. Buyers would own their houses while the trust kept ownership of the land beneath them. The HOA would collect a modest ground payment from each household and forward one lump sum to the trust annually. 6 acres around our farmhouse were carved out entirely, not part of the HOA, not subject to its rules, fines, or liens. The lease also barred the HOA from selling development rights, expanding the community, or renewing the lease without the trust's written approval. It sounds strange for a neighborhood of single-family homes today, but in 1997, it's the only reason Maple Creek got built. The developer didn't need the capital to buy the land outright, so the first houses sold nearly 30% below comparable homes in the county. Teachers, firefighters, and young couples could afford to buy in. Everyone who bought at the time knew exactly what the deal was. House is yours, ground belongs to the trust, rent is modest and capped by formula. For years it worked fine. The trouble crept in slowly. Original owners sold and moved on. Closing paperwork got denser. Realtors started calling the ground payment just another community fee. Eventually, the HOA rebranded it the Land Stability Fee, and most newer buyers had no idea what it actually funded. They assumed it covered landscaping or pool upkeep. After my father's stroke, I went through the trust's books. The last full ground rent payment had landed 18 months earlier. 6 quarterly payments were missing. 3 certified default notices had gone out. Vanessa Klein had signed for every single one. Meanwhile, the HOA was still collecting the fee from all 96 households every month. I assumed disorganization at first. Then I added it up. With interest and late fees, the association owed the trust close to $400,000, which raised the obvious question: if the homeowners were paying every month, where was the money actually going? Number, the visit Vanessa showed up at my house 4 days after I sent the HOA a formal demand for the back rent. 9 in the morning, white luxury SUV, leather folder, a clipboard thick enough to double as a weapon. She walked up my driveway without asking. "Mr. Mercer, we need to discuss your compliance issues." She handed me 7 violation notices. My work truck visible from the road, my fence the wrong shade, my generator an eyesore, my mailbox off-standard, my native grass too tall, my shed never approved, even my flagpole allegedly oversized. "You know this property isn't part of the HOA?" I said, and went inside for the recorded exclusion. The language was unambiguous. The homestead and its 6 acres were exempt from HOA covenants, assessments, liens, and architectural control. "That language is 30 years old," she said. "Communities evolve. Recorded property rights don't expire because a board president doesn't like them." That's when she opened the leather folder, 3 documents inside. One that would make my property a voluntary HOA member. One that would shift the boundary line to hand Maple Creek nearly an acre of my land for a wider access road. And one that would extend the master ground lease another 40 years. Barely keeping pace with inflation, while quietly granting the HOA broad authority to transfer development rights without the trust's future sign-off. "Who drafted this?" I asked. "Our attorneys." "For what project?" She hesitated half a second. That told me everything. My attorney, Elise Park, found the answer that afternoon. Meridian Ridge Development had filed preliminary plans for 70 new homes on the undeveloped western edge of my family's land. Townhouses, a second entrance, a commercial strip near the highway. Meridian had already sunk money into surveys and engineering, and their investor materials claimed Maple Creek controlled the development rights. It didn't. Without my signature, the whole expansion was worthless paper. "This was never about your mailbox," Elise said. "She promised Meridian something she doesn't own." I told Vanessa I wouldn't sign. "You may own 6 acres, Mr. Mercer," she said, "but you're surrounded by our community. We control everything around you. You manage it, you don't own it. The retaliation started fast. A sign planted by my driveway reading non-compliant property, legal review pending. County inspectors fielding anonymous complaints about my electrical work. My work truck towed off a private access road my family had used for decades. A client receiving an anonymous tip that my engineering license was under review. A neighborhood post warning parents to keep kids away from my property. I stopped arguing online and started a file instead. Dates, names, photos, invoices, every lie, every letter. Number what the records showed. Elise sent a formal demand for the HOA's financial records. Vanessa stalled twice, then complied by dumping 23 unlabeled, water-damaged boxes on my porch. No index, no order, clearly meant to be unreadable rather than transparent. Elise brought in Frank Dobbins, the former HOA treasurer who'd quietly resigned 2 years earlier. She kept handing me checks with no contracts, he told us. Whenever I asked questions, she said I was slowing down community business. 3 nights at my kitchen table, the 3 of us sorted bank statements, invoices, minutes, lien notices, and sale records while my father watched westerns in the next room. The land stability fee turned out to be the whole scheme in miniature. Each of the 96 households paid roughly $240 a month, enough of it earmarked for ground rent to keep the lease current. Homeowners had paid. The trust hadn't been paid. So where had it gone? Straight into a web of vendors with forgettable names: Klein Community Services, a landscaping outfit, a resolution firm, a compliance solutions company, all of them registered to Vanessa, her brother, her brother-in-law, or her real estate office. Over 4 years, more than $300,000 had moved from HOA accounts into companies tied to her family, billed under vague line items like seasonal enhancement and resident resolution services. One company had been paid nearly $80,000 with no employees, no equipment, and no phone number on file. Then there was the loan, $600,000 borrowed against the clubhouse and pool as collateral, something the bylaws required a homeowner vote to approve. Frank had attended the meeting where the minutes claimed that vote happened. "We never discussed it," he said. The font in the minutes changed mid-paragraph. Someone had inserted the approval language after the fact. The worst find was buried in a folder marked Architectural Review, Closed Cases, a spreadsheet titled Compliance Conversion List. Names, ages, jobs, income estimates, debt loads, family situations, fines owed, and a likelihood of selling column, annotated with notes like fixed income, single mother, likely pressure point, escalate landscaping, refer to collections, commission potential. "These aren't compliance records," I said. "No," said Elise, "they're targets." The mechanism was simple and cruel. Pick an easy-to-violate rule. Issue a small fine, let interest and fees balloon it. Hand the balance to the collection agency owned by her brother-in-law. Place a lien. Then swoop in as a real estate agent offering to help the panicked homeowner sell fast, collecting a commission on a forced sale she'd engineered from the start. One name on that list was Walter Green, a 68-year-old retired Army mechanic who'd lived in Maple Creek over 20 years. His original violation, a flagpole 6 inches over the height limit. First fine, $150. By the time we found his file, the HOA claimed he owed over $6,000 and was preparing to lien his house. "I paid for that house for 32 years, he told me, hands shaking. Now she says I could lose it over 6 inches of flagpole. That was the moment the fight stopped being about my land and became about how many families she'd already fed into this machine. Number the meeting, the smear, and the neighbor who asked the right question. Vanessa didn't wait for us to finish. Within a day, every homeowner got an urgent community threat email describing an outside landowner trying to seize the neighborhood, never naming me directly, but describing me as a hostile landlord about to jack up rent, close the pool, and force people out. At the emergency meeting she called, the clubhouse overflowed. She stood under a projected photo of my farmhouse with red text reading "What happens if Mercer takes control," and let the crowd's imagination do the rest. Evictions, road closures, retail development, none of it true, All of it left just vague enough to terrify people. When I stood to correct the record about the missing rent, she cut my mic. The meeting ended without questions. By morning, someone had spray-painted "Land Thief" on my fence, eggs had hit my windows, and protesters with handmade signs were camped at the end of my own family's driveway. Then Maria Santos came to my door, a respiratory therapist, single mother, 5 years into her mortgage. "If Vanessa's lying," she said, "prove it." I showed her everything. The lease, the exclusion, the default notices, the trust's bank records. Her family alone had paid over $8,000 in land stability fees that never reached the trust. I showed her the compliance conversion list. Her name was on it. Single mother, high mortgage exposure, likely compliance after escalation. She posted one question in the neighborhood group: "If the HOA collected our ground rent, can the board show where it went?" Vanessa deleted it in 11 minutes. Maria reposted it and got removed from the group entirely. And by Monday, 32 homeowners had reached out to her privately wanting answers. Vanessa's response was a $7,500 special assessment to defend Maple Creek. At the next meeting, Walter stood up holding his lien notice. "You want another $7,500 from me. You haven't explained where the first $6,000 went." Frank backed him with the vendor payment records. This time the room turned on her, and she left through a side door without finishing the meeting. Number the forged signature and the fire 2 days later. Frank showed up before sunrise with a folder he'd kept hidden since leaving the board. A proposed 40-year lease extension, supposedly signed by my father, full authority to Vanessa for the loan, the transfer of development rights to Meridian, a waiver of the trust's audit rights. The signature looked right at a glance. But my father had never mentioned signing anything, and the date on the page, March 17th, fell 2 days after his stroke, while hospital records showed him unconscious and on a ventilator that exact afternoon. "That's forged," I said. "Probably," Elise said. "We need more than probably." The notary listed on the document, Charles Weller, had died 6 months before the supposed signing date. The file's metadata traced back to a computer registered to Klein Community Services. The signature image had been lifted from an older document and resized. There were no independent witnesses, as the original lease required. "This is enough to challenge it," I said. "Not yet," Elise said. "Right now she can call it a staff error. If she uses this after being warned it's false, we can prove intent." So we waited, and 2 nights later, my father's medical alarm woke me to an orange glow through the window. The equipment barn was on fire, 60 years of family records inside. Survey maps, correspondence with the original developer, my grandfather's notebooks. A firefighter held me back as the roof came down. My father, barely able to speak, gripped my wrist on the porch. "Not original," he managed, then pointed toward his bedroom. Taped under his nightstand drawer was a brass key to a safe deposit box. My grandfather never trusted a single copy of anything important. The real lease, the signed survey, and the homestead exclusion were sitting in a bank vault, untouched. The fire marshal ruled it arson within hours. The barn's power had been cut before midnight, the side door lock cut from outside, accelerant found at 2 separate points. A traffic camera caught a Klein Community Services SUV heading toward my property at 1:43 a.m. and leaving at 2:12. The fire was reported at 2:16. The contractor, Travis Bell, had been paid $8,500 by Klein Community Services 3 days before the fire for emergency document disposal, and another $2,000 afterward as a completion bonus. Store footage showed him buying fuel containers and a bolt cutter the night before. A recovered text from Vanessa's number read: "Make sure the old records don't survive the weekend." Number the hearing Vanessa filed for an emergency injunction to block me from collecting rent, contacting the HOA's bank, or challenging Meridian's development rights. In court, her attorney presented the 40-year lease extension as proof my father had approved everything. Elise let it stand, then called Vanessa to the witness stand. "Did Arthur Mercer sign this in front of you?" "Yes." Elise put up the hospital chart, unconscious, intubated on a ventilator at the exact hour of the alleged signing. "I may be mistaken about the date," Vanessa said. "You signed a sworn affidavit confirming it." Then came the dead notary, the file metadata pointing to her own company's computer, the missing witnesses, the diverted rent payments, the shell companies, the unauthorized $600,000 loan, the compliance conversion list, an email to a Meridian executive reading once Mercer's extension is recorded. Financing closes, keep his son out of the process until then, and finally a recording of Vanessa's own voice. If Mercer won't sign willingly, we make living there impossible until he does. Judge Hart denied the injunction, froze every HOA account, appointed an independent receiver, barred Vanessa from all HOA systems and records, suspended every pending lien and assessment, and referred the forged lease and suspected evidence destruction to the prosecutor. Outside, Vanessa told reporters I was seizing the neighborhood with my family's wealth. When asked if I planned to evict anyone, I said, "No, the homeowners paid what they were told to pay. The only thing in danger is a system that charged people for owning homes they'd already paid for." Number the morning of the raid at 7:15 the next morning, an hour before the receiver's scheduled takeover, Frank called. Lights were on at the HOA office. I got there to find Vanessa's SUV backed up to the service entrance, board members loading boxes, a computer being wheeled out, a shredder still warm beside 3 bags of shredded paper. "You're violating a court order," I told her. "The order's against you," she snapped. "These are personal records." The county marshal arrived with Judge Hart's order and shut it down on the spot. Bank statements, vendor contracts, lien files, prepaid phones, Meridian closing documents, all seized before they left the property. Vanessa refused to hand over her keys until the marshal physically removed them from her hand. That same morning, Meridian Ridge cut her loose. Internal emails showed one executive, Brent Holcomb, had kept negotiating even after Elise's formal legal notice warned the company the lease was forged, and the HOA had no authority to sell development rights. "We need documents executed before the receiver can interfere," he'd written. Once recorded, unwinding becomes their problem. Vanessa had answered, "I can control the board for another 24 hours. After that, no promises. When Meridian's board saw the fire report and the forged lease, they suspended Holcomb, killed the deal, and started cooperating with the prosecutor. Following the money, the receiver brought in a forensic accountant, Naomi Brooks, who spent 12 days tracing every dollar. Shell companies linked to Vanessa's relatives, duplicate invoices, hotel and spa charges on the HOA card, real estate commissions from families on the target list, and a string of transfers into a Nevada trust controlled by her sister. The last one, $620,000, moved days before Maria's audit request. The running total, $1,472,860 misappropriated, diverted, or hidden. Days after that number came out, Vanessa filed for bankruptcy, claiming she had barely $20,000 left. Naomi didn't buy it. The Nevada Trust had just bought a lake house, her Lexus had been paid for through her company, and a brokerage account held commissions from families on the compliance list. "She isn't broke," Naomi said. "She's hiding." Judge Hart signed a series of clawback orders freezing everything the money trail touched: her home, the lake property, the brokerage account, the car, unpaid commissions, her stake in her own companies, and assets quietly moved to relatives after the audit request began. Meridian settled separately. Full abandonment of development claims, return of every deposit, a contribution to the restitution fund, and Holcomb terminated and turned into a cooperating witness. Deciding what came next with the HOA's finances frozen and its president under investigation. A receiver-run meeting drew more than 140 residents. I laid out 3 paths. Keep the existing HOA and cover a roughly $10,000 per household assessment to rebuild it. Sell to a new developer and accept 70 more homes and outside control. Or dissolve the mandatory HOA entirely, Let each family buy the land under their own house at a fixed, reduced price. Use restitution money to cover closing costs for families Vanessa had harmed. And replace the old HOA with a voluntary association with no power to fine, lien, or force anyone to join. Maria spoke about her own name on the target list. Walter set his flagpole lien notice on the table. Frank admitted he'd stayed silent for too long. Even Richard Cole, once one of Vanessa's loudest defenders, admitted he'd signed documents without reading them because it was easier than asking questions. The vote, 81 households for dissolving the old system, 9 to keep it, 6 abstaining. Number making it right over the following months. The investigation and restitution fund grew to just under $1.8 million once insurance payouts, clawbacks, and the Meridian settlement were combined. At a meeting stripped of banners and theatrics, homeowners received checks instead of violation notices. Walter got back nearly $12,000 tied to his flagpole ordeal. Maria received over $17,000. A retired couple recovered $32,000 from a lien built on fabricated inspections. A widower got back money charged to his HOA account while his wife was in cancer treatment. A woman who'd sold her home $70,000 under value after a wave of manufactured violations was found and paid back in full. Every improper lien was lifted. Every forced special assessment was refunded. Homeowners began buying the land under their own houses at a fixed, court-approved price, with closing cost help for the families Vanessa had targeted hardest. Walter was the first to record his new deed. In place of the old HOA, residents formed a voluntary community association. No power to fine anyone over paint or mailboxes or flagpoles. No ability to lien or force membership. Financials posted publicly every quarter. Vanessa eventually pleaded to charges covering fraud, forgery, obstruction, misuse of association funds, and conspiracy to destroy evidence. She lost her real estate license for good, was barred from ever managing community funds again, and was ordered to keep paying restitution out of future earnings. Travis Bell, the contractor who'd set the fire, testified against her as part of his own plea deal. A year later, Maple Creek looks almost the same from the road. Same houses, same pool, same clubhouse. But there are now vegetable gardens in front yards, work trucks parked openly in driveways, a purple front door nobody convened an emergency meeting over, and Walter's flagpole still standing exactly 6 inches too tall. First thing I see every morning from my porch. Voluntary membership in the new association passed 70% in its first year, enough to keep the pool and clubhouse running without anyone being forced to pay. Property values didn't fall. They rose once clear titles and the absence of disputed liens made the homes easier to finance and sell. My father, recovering slowly, watched the neighborhood from our porch one evening, kids in the community garden, Maria organizing a food drive, Frank and Richard arguing over font sizes in a quarterly report, Walter raising his flag at sunset. Your grandfather, he said slowly, kept the land. He looked back toward the houses. You kept the people? For months, everyone in Maple Creek called me the landlord like it was an accusation. Legally, they weren't wrong. But owning the ground was never the point. The point was following every diverted dollar, lifting every illegal lien, and making sure 96 families finally had real, unencumbered ownership of the ground under the homes they'd already paid for. They called the police on me because they assumed I didn't belong there. What they found out instead was that I owned the ground under their clubhouse, their pool, and every street they thought they controlled. And that winning was never just about proving that. It was about making sure the people who'd been hurt got their money, their rights, and their homes back.